Hi everybody, hope you're doing marvelously well. In this episode, we're going to have 7 different people showing you how they mix kick drums. So what's interesting about this is you've got 7 different mixers and everybody has a completely different process. There is no one way, but all the genres are different. You'll be able to listen to different things and see what you can adopt, if not all of the techniques. So this follows on from last week when we did 7 different bass mixes. The thing that continually comes up in Produce Like a Pro is low-end mixing. It's one of the most searched topics. So we talked about mixing a bass, and that is not just bass guitar, but we've done bass synths, etc. Now we're going to talk about kick drums. First one I'm going to do is me, and I'm going to show you how I mix hybrid, because I get asked all the time about how I work hybrid. So we're going to do a hybrid mixing through the SSL. Stick around though for another 6 different producer, engineers, and mixers who will show you all kinds of genres. So this is how I mix hybrid. Quite often you've watched videos with me and I am mixing entirely in the box. But this is going to be a hybrid mix. So here's the track. I'm going to play the drums, the bass, and the rhythm guitars. Cool, so you get the gist. Let's just solo the drums on their own. So this is just the drum track. So you get the idea. Now, there's a lot of aggression on that kick from EQ. There's also a lot of low end. And I'm going to show you what I do. So I'm going to solo the kick elements. And they are not actually being EQ'd on the individual elements themselves, but they are going to a kick master bus here. And this is the EQ. So our first EQ is with a Mac DSP EQ4, I believe. Yep. And all I'm doing is just boosting some ultra high end, at least for a kick. I've chosen, 766 here. So, 7.5K, but look how wide the bell is. So it's basically 7 and above is just boosted. And that's giving us a lot of that snap and bite that you can hear. Then I'm going into an API 2500 compressor. So now those moments, just evening out the kick. But you can hear there's a lot more low end coming out of that. There's a lot more fun things happening. So let's go and check out what's going on. So we have the kick coming down the channel. If you look, there's the very occasional peak. Occasional. I don't care about the occasional peak. A big part of an SSL sound is actually, especially a 4000, is hitting the console pretty hard. If you watch a lot of great mixers who mix through SSLs, you'll notice their master buses quite often are pinned. There's some natural limiting that happens on the master bus stage, and hitting it really hard actually sounds rather fantastic. It gives you natural limiting that isn't like square waved as though, if it was in digital. It's a lot more pleasing. Anyway, the first thing I think to think about and to notice is this button that's engaged here. It's called channel out. Why? Rather than channel in, there's channel out. What does that mean? That means the EQ that's applied here is going into the compression. A massive part of an SSL sound is EQ into compression. It's great on guitars, for instance, because you get that pang, pang sound. You get that, what quite often is called spankiness of an SSL. Really a unique sound. So if you're going to use a plugin, always do that function. At least start with that by boosting EQ into compression. It's a huge part of that sound. Okay, so talking of compression, what do we have? We have it set to 3:1 here. threshold, it's capturing anywhere from 3 to occasionally 6 dB worth of compression. So quite a lot of compression. You know, and we've got a couple of dB going on the 25 API 2500 over there. So, you know, it depends on the kick hit, but there's a decent amount of compression going on, so it's really controlling it. Okay, so there is, that's completely unengaged. It's not engaged at all. There's a little bit of high passing going on. It's barely in. But we do have a lot of boost here at about 5K. If I take the EQ out, you can hear. First of all, we hear a massive level boost as it goes into the compression. You hear that extra snap. Then there's actually some more boost at about 2.5, which is a favorite frequency of mine for rock, for like classic rock. So I'm actually doing some 2.5 boost there, so it's 2.5K. Then there's cut, and the cut is around about 350, which is pretty standard for me, 350, 400, pulling out those ugly low mids. Then, last but no means least, I'm actually at about 60 hertz, and I'm boosting it really dramatically. I've got 9 dB of boost. 9 dB of boost at 50 hertz. So there's a whole ton of 50 hertz going on, a ton of 350, 400 being pulled out, a pretty good boost at 2.5K, and then another boost at 5. Now, this was very specific for this song. I don't always do a 5K boost there. Sometimes I just stick with the 2.5 for a more classic rock sound. But those guitars, as you heard at the beginning, are massive and they're really super aggressive. There's two other secrets going on here. You hear that amount of low end? That's not just from the 9 dB boost. There's more than that going on. But before we get to that, we have the insert engaged here. So you'll see the insert engaged. Why is that? Well, the insert is going to an API 560B. It's an API EQ. And this is exaggerating again those frequencies. We're really going to town. We didn't do anything really EQ-wise in Pro Tools. We're doing it all on the console here. So here we've got a 63 boost, and then we've got a little bit of cut at the 250, and even a little bit at the 125. And the reason why I cut the 125 is because sometimes, I do this a lot, sometimes that area, which is good for like classic rock 70s style, but that's smothering the bass guitar. I find that quite often that 100-ish, 120 area just kills the bass guitar low end. If there's too much of it in the kick, it just gets really messy. So I'm scooping a little bit out. That's a big difference. So if I take the insert out, put it back in. Now take the EQ and the insert out. It's kind of a boring kick sound. Put those in, more aggressive, more low lows. But it's more than that, because we have something really extra special going on, which is beautiful on hardware, and that's this here. I'm even going to boost it a little bit more. You hear that low end thump? I'm not sure what you guys and girls will be listening on, so I'm going to move over here. Hopefully Eric can follow me. I'm going over here, and I'm going to solo the kick. See that low end disappeared, and also solo the sub. Hear that low lows? One last thing, just to really annoy Eric, I'm going to go over here and I am going to float the channel, which means I'm taking this channel out of it. But can you hear that? If you're in a situation now where you've got like little speakers and you can't hear the low lows, try just for a few seconds. I'm going to let it play, and you're going to hear just the sub playing. Pretty massive. So that is just the sub. Pretty insane, isn't it? So I'm going to unfloat this now, put the channel back in so you can hear the sub. So what am I doing? I did boost it quite dramatically. I boosted it more than we're using in the mix, just to illustrate it. But So what we've got is we've got this DBX 120A. I first discovered this actually working with Jack Douglas, but also when I worked with Dave Sardi, he had the older version of this, which was called the Disco Boombox. And it was something that was sold to DJs in the 70s when they were DJing and they wanted to play disco. It's a sub-harmonic synthesizer. And the way I've got it set here is I think I'm at about, I'm around about 30-ish hertz. That's 36 here, so, and that's 24 to 30. So I'm probably about 30-ish hertz. And it's just giving me that little extra subbiness, which comes underneath. So you've got bass guitar here living in like the 80 to 100, maybe even going down as low as 60 and just getting some real beautiful low end there. And then this sub underneath just makes it feel really classy. So let's listen to all the drums together now that you've got an explanation how it all works. And pay attention and see if you can pick up the sub. I'm going to throw in the bass guitar. It's a really heavily overdriven bass. Throw in the kick with the sub. Now everything back together again. Throw in some guitars. And that's how I hybrid mix kick drum. Next up, we have Cameron Webb, who you probably know from, I think he did the last 6 Motorhead records, Pennywise, Silverstein, Weezer, Kelly Clarkson, a whole snizzle ton of Orange County punk bands and rock bands. And this one is pretty special because he's mixing the Aquabats, and their drummer at the time was a young Travis Barker. So this is a really cool one. So Cameron's going to show us how he mixes kick entirely in the box, and he's going to explain how he uses compression and EQ.
The stock, and you'll look and you'll notice that on the kick drum, I'll start with an EQ, and the sounds on this were pretty good, so I didn't want to mess with it much. So honestly, you're going to look at this EQ and you'll be like, Cameron, are you doing anything? I felt like I needed a little top end, so I'm adding a little bit of top end, and the way I get this top end, I don't just say, hey, I need a 4K or 10K or 14K. I just listen. I listen, and then I tweak the knobs, and I crank it back and forth until I find out what I really like. So it's really minimal. You look here, too. I also had a filter on this. The reason why I had the filter is there seemed to be a lot of bottom end that kind of floated around on this when I would compress it. So basically what I'm trying to do is I'm rolling off some low lows, like it's probably like below 50, basically below 50, which in theory, your speakers are going to get to about 50 or 60, but most speakers aren't going to have a 25 or that kind of low frequency. So that's just going to muddy things up. It's going to mess up compressors. So I'm just very minimal with that. Next in my chain is I have another Mic DSP plugin, which I love. It's called the 6030, and it's actually the first one that comes up, but what I love about it, it's similar to like a Fairchild. It's similar to an Altec 322C, which is a compressor I use a lot. It's very subtle. I love this compressor. You can put it on and you don't have to hit it very hard. You just hit it lightly, and it just it adds a little bit of control. And you can see here, I'm actually hardly touching it. When I was hitting this too hard earlier, it was giving me more of that woofy bottom end that I didn't like. So I backed it off a little bit. This is to help me get a little more consistency in the kick drum. Travis's consistency is great, but we try to get a little bit more than what is natural with an artist. there's not a lot of settings on this plugin, so there's not a lot to tell you. There's the threshold, which you saw me crank up and down. The time constant, which is the release. Now, I put it to the fastest release, which is actually still a pretty slow release because it's kind of based off of like a tube compressor. If I were to put it on the slow, it literally just parks there the whole time. The other setting is just the output, and I'm just kind of adjusting based off of, if I were to put it in bypass, I want it to be a fairly similar level to when I have it on or off. So that's kind of why it's a makeup gain is what I'm using it for. After that, I'm going to the SSL plugin. One of the reasons why is I'm going to talk to Christian later on and figure out where this was mixed, but I believe it was mixed on an SSL. So my first instinct when I wanted a compressor and EQ was to go to the SSL plugins that we have. This one, you'll notice when you start to look at it, it's a little more, I'm doing a little bit more work. Not a ton of work, but I'm doing a little more. You see, I'm doing a similar thing with the filters here. Do I need to do it? Is it redundant? Well, maybe because of this compressor hitting before, it might matter a little bit. I basically would just test it, and I would choose, hey, does this sound right? And that's why I chose to use that filter. These filters are great. They work for everything. They're awesome. Then let's just jump to the compressor next. The SSL compressors, they're awesome. They're, if you use them right, they're subtle, and they just add that glue to things. The ratio, I keep the ratio usually around 3:1, which is pretty good. I believe it's 3:1. It says 3 right there. And then threshold, I base it off of the meters. So I look at the meter here. This is definitely a setting that is not very aggressive, and you're not going to notice it. You're not going to notice it sucking the life out of everything. If I mute it, the core sound is pretty good. I mean, let's take all the compressors off for a second. It's a good core sound. I have no idea what mic he was using. I have no clue, but I'm not worried. So then I look at EQ. You notice that it seems like I'm brightening it up, and I am brightening it up a little bit because I'm trying to add a little more definition to what he's doing. Like with everything else that I do, to choose my frequencies, I'm usually going to crank them up loud, and I'm going to find frequencies I like or dislike. So frequencies like this, I wouldn't like, and I would dig this out. But here I was searching for a little top end without making it too clicky. And I kind of like that frequency right there. Somewhere around 4. So basically what I'm doing is I'm choosing there based off of getting a little clarity and everything. And you get down to the low mids. I mean, in general, it's kind of the people always talk about, like, if you want a heavy metal kick drum, take all the 400 out because it's a bad frequency. And it's not always a bad frequency. Sometimes it's interesting. So it just depends on the song and the way it was recorded. And if you look here, you'll notice that I'm actually probably around 400 or 500 that I'm scooping a little bit out because I felt I needed a little more clarity. So you'll notice that I'm doing that. You can tell here though, I got this other little trick going on where I have a narrower Q is what I'm gonna call it in that. Low end. I want a little more bottom end, and I basically say around 60, because most people's cars are 60 or 100. That's kind of where they stock cars are kind of set at. So I use that, and I love the feel of that. The rest of the stuff is all, I'm not using the gates, or it's all in phase, so I don't have to worry about that. And the trim, everything's pretty much normal. So basically, straightforward.
Next up, we have the rather wonderful Mark Needham, whose credits include the Imagine Dragons, The Killers, Pink, Train, tons and tons of people. And in this episode, Mark is going to blend his kicks, then he busses them, and then he applies his processing to the bus. He shows us how he gets consistency and better attack on a kick, and also takes a moment to answer a question we had off camera. And that question was, how do you know when you've got the right low end? So it's a pretty awesome clip.
On this one, I'm going to go to just an MN kick that I've saved here. That kind of gives me a good starting point of where I'm going to start with this kick drum. It's a little easier than starting from scratch every time. What I'm going to do is boost some 8K just to get a little more attack, and then I'm also going to boost it 50 cycles here just to get a little more oomph out of it. And I'm probably going to add a couple more EQs. I'm kind of a fan of, I like the sound of different EQs for different purposes. So I'm using that SSL to really get that kind of 8K attack and using it for that 50 cycle oomph. But I'll probably use this Abbey Road just to push a little more in like the upper mid range, more like the 2.5 or 3K range. That's out. Something like that. There's out. Yeah. And then I have one last EQ, which I use a lot, which is just using the Pultec, where you're boosting at 60 cycles and attenuating at 60 cycles as well. Depending on the kick drum, that'll give just a little more roundness on the bottom end. Here's out. And there's in. So some combination of how much you're boosting at 60 and how much you're attenuating. You can kind of keep it from getting too flabby on the bottom, but still get a nice round low end on the kick. And we'll make it a little broader. So that's kind of where I would start with EQ on it. For me, I listen to the same set of speakers every day, 12 hours a day, and I rarely listen to any other speakers besides what I'm working on, but what I mix on. And I just kind of know what's right with the kick drum, where pretty much anything I'm listening to, hopefully I have a pretty good idea if it's sounding good. I think it's important. I think it's really important to listen to the same set of speakers. You find one set of speakers that you like and really get to know those. Once you find something that you really like, just stick with it, and you get to know every song that you work on and every song that you listen to with people that you like. That's the easiest way. I don't really look at meters that much, or I can feel the subwoofer on my pants leg, so I know there's plenty of bottom. I'm also using this on this SSL. I'm also compressing. You see, I have a fast release, and I'm compressing down at a ratio of about 4:1, and maybe 6 dB down. Just to tighten up the low end, and I'm trying to keep it fat, but also keep the low end tight. There's some spots it gets a little uneven on that attack, so I'm going to use this Fatso compressor that I can set. So I'm not compressing anything below 480. And I'm using a slow attack, medium attack and a super fast release. And I'm going to use that to try to just tame some of the really hard attacks, like in the chorus on this. So I'm going down about 2 dB when he really hits hard on the attack there. So that is what I would do on the compression. I have two other things that I'm probably going to use on this. One is Oxford Involution, which I'm using just to add a little more snap on that attack. Here you can add a little more transient on that attack. And you can also use this to cut the sustain if you want. So I'm going to leave the sustain the same, but just add a little more attack and make sure it's not overloading.
Next up, we have our good friend, Mr. Bob Horn, whose credits are massive across pop and R&B, such as BTS, Usher, Timbaland, Neo, Marshmello, and another Kelly Clarkson credit. In this course, Bob is mixing a pop and R&B track from scratch in real time. And after applying some processing on the kick, then mixing other elements, Bob then uses bus processing to refine the kick even more. What's interesting about all of these is everybody has a completely different approach, but they all get amazing results.
Okay, we're going to get some of the drums going, so we can get a groove happening for the basis of the song. A lot of times when tracks are recorded low or their level just ended up low, I like to gain them up sometimes so they're a little closer to the top. That way I don't have faders, all the way at the top with no more room to go, and just kind of gain staging things. So I'm starting out, I use the input gain to just raise the track up level wise. Then I added some of the subharmonic pillow that the sound has. 60 hertz, about 3 dB, somewhat tight. Just want to kind of get some subs going. As far as the top end of the kick, whether it's higher or mid-range, I'm going to decide how much of that and what frequency later on once I get a little more stuff going. That way it can, I could pick it now and just go in the mid-range, or I could go up high. But with nothing else happening in the mix, there's no real reason to decide that, because I can find the perfect frequency and the perfect amount later and meld that in around other things like the loops, which have high-end information, and the vocals and the guitars, which have mid-range information. I might find a better spot than if I choose that now. So the sub kind of pillowy low end, that's not going to change, but the high frequency, we have so many areas where we could choose to push that up and make that cut through. So we're going to leave that alone for now. I'm tapping a little bit on the kick with the built-in compressor. I just back down the release from the stock. It's usually at 160. We're going to go somewhere 20, 30. The attack is 16 milliseconds, and ratio is only 2.2. I'm not hitting it too hard, just you can see by the meter, it's just tapping. But listen to the tail of the kick. It's kind of got like a almost vinyl lo-fi crackliness to it. And the compressor's adding a little bit of snap to the kick. Nothing extreme, but it's bringing that tail up after the initial hit of the kick. So you can hear, as soon as I engage the compressor up here, you can hear the length of the kick come up in volume. And that's the compressor backing off the release and the volume returning to normal. So let me show that one more time. I'm going to start with the compressor off, and then you'll see me engage it. So when that happens, it also alters the frequency response a little bit. Some of the mids come up. I'm going to kind of duck those down a little bit. Just slightly. Now, that's definitely something that could change later. Okay, so now that we have some tone going on other than just drums, I want to revisit the drums just a little bit. Now that we have some other stuff going on, we're losing the power of the kick a little bit, and there's definitely a mid-range happening in the drums that might just be a little too strong. So we have our submasters here. So we have everything drum kit wise except for the kick going to this drum master here. So I'm gonna solo that. So I have this Eliza EQ again, and I picked some frequencies, basically right around 1K. We're gonna cut about a dB and a half almost, and then down at 115, 110 hertz, we're gonna put the sharper bell button in and cut also, and that's about 2 dB. So check this out. We're just gonna clean up the frequencies a little bit. So that helps. Let's add our kick back in. So I want to take advantage of our parallel kick channel here and see what we can come up with that. So I put a SSL compressor, Sound Toys decapitator, and the Waves L1 limiter. So first we're gonna leave this kick channel completely natural, no plugins, and the one next to it feeding from the same bus is where we're gonna do our heavy processing, and then we'll get a blend and mix the two together. So we're gonna start off just really compressing the kick. So we're making it a lot smaller. Fast release, slow attack. So we get the attack through, but then it really clamps down on the meat of the sound, but then it rises up for that kind of vinyl crispiness it's adding in. Then our decapitator, we're just going to distort the heck out of it. And we'll blend the mix back a little bit. It almost sounds like fire after the kick. It's kind of cool. And then we're going to set the limiter. So definitely on the hard attacks, it's getting hit by the brick wall limiter, and then the smaller attacks are just barely hitting it. But we've definitely reduced the dynamic range, and now the kick is a whole different long sustaining kind of dirty sound. Here's the original. Here's our super processed. So now we're going to blend them together. Add that in with the kit. So you can see when I turn on that parallel, the energy of that kick drum and the tone and the excitement it comes alive. Obviously there's a volume difference, but even tonally, because the drum is so much more compressed and distorted, it takes on a new character. If that becomes, too much later, we can always just reduce this fader.
So next up, we have the rather wonderful Bob Marlette. Bob's credits are Rob Zombie, Filter, Seether, Anvil, Ozzy Osbourne, and many, many more. Bob is a great guy, and in this video, he mixes his kick in a very busy track. And he's mixing it so not to occupy too much space, but maintains its clarity and focus. He splits his kick into 3 tracks, so we can treat them all independently and differently, and then blend them back together. It's a very similar thing that many of us do with bass guitar, but in this, he's going to do it with a kick drum.
I'll take the kick channel, the Beta 52 on the inside, and I'll split it off a couple of times to be able to achieve several different directions for the 2 different channels. In this instance, I'll start with the inside mic. In this case, I start with a gate because I want to be able to control this particular channel. I want to be able to control it to really get the desired sort of energy and effect from this initial chant. Here you can, let me take everything off it for a second. You can kind of hear. You can hear there's a little bit, there's not a lot of bleed, but you can definitely hear a little bit of bleed and extra little noise and stuff. And I like to get that as clean as possible. So what I do is I slap that gate on it, close it down so it's nice and tight. And the great thing is because we've laid, here you can see it, right here on this track right here, it's just literally a trigger. We'll go up here and you can see it. You can see that it's right here. I just laid literally down, Chris laid the, when I say Chris did it, he'll lay those little just chunks of audio, and its job is just to literally open up the gate. So I can move that, I can slide that in time if I need to, just to make sure it opens up really cleanly. So then I gate that down a little bit, and then I'll go to the EQ, and we add a little bit of EQ to that. In this one, what I'm doing is I'm adding just a little bit of, let's see, what did I add on the top end? I'm at 4.3, just give a little, clarity to the front end of that. I'm not using any compression on this. Oh, so I'm adding, let's see, in the low end, I'm adding at about 75 hertz. And then I got a little bump at 200. And then another little, kind of mid bump. I'm adding, 3 at 2.3, just to give a little bit more oomph. Then what I've done was I've split that off, as I was talking about the split. I'm not compressing it, but I'm adding an L2 as somewhat of a brick wall, just so I can get that kick to really, boom, hold its position. So I'm not going too crazy on it. There's not a lot of, actual reduction. It's more just to be able to hold it. On the next track, I'm doing the same thing, except I'm creating a little bit more of that kind of kick drum, I call it conk, which is more of, a little bit more centered in its frequencies to get it more in the 250 to 350, 400. So it has an ability to kind of poke out a little bit more. It's kind of the stuff that normally a lot of people would take out, because in a sort of classic kick drum sound, a lot of times they remove almost everything at 300 to 400 in that range to give you that sort of deeper kind of smiley face kind of sound for that. Then now let's look at the next mic. There we go. There's our 47 on the outside. And if you can hear, you can really hear the difference in that, how it's way more, just conky. The cool thing is then you stick them together. Boom. Get a lot of energy. It's also gated because it's an outside. This one's a little bit more important to gate because you hear a lot of snare and shush and stuff. You want to get rid of that kind of shenanigans. And then you can see I'm radically EQing this because I want it to be a real, a real specific kind of frequency to really poke through. And with all the kick drums, as you see, I've added L2 to all of them, essentially to get that, to really hold its position. Because you got to remember, especially in making rock records, this is a big one. You have to sustain your imagery in the middle of a huge sonic landscape. There's so much noise that is going to end up on this track, so you've really got to, it's really important to hold your position, hold its position so it can really poke out in the middle of the, just the mayhem. I'll just go back and open up everybody for a minute and you can kind of hear what I'm talking about. Now you can hear sort of everybody. With this massive sound there, you've got to really make sure that that kick doesn't occupy too much space, but it maintains its clarity and its focus. Every great record that you hear from anybody who's mixing, who's really good at what they do, they always understand the value of being able to sustain their position, to be able to hold the position for all their components. So when you listen to it, you're listening to it, you go, oh, I hear this little part, I hear that little part, I still hear every bit of the vocal, but yet there's my kick drum with all this sound and still holding position.
Next up, we have the rather wonderful Richard Furch, whose credits are Prince, Tyrese, Boyz II Men, Usher, and Outkast. Richard takes us through the mixing process in a lot of detail and how he achieves some weight in a very strange electronic kick that has a wooden click blended with it. And he uses a tape emulation plugin to tie the kick in with the snare.
Okay, so on the kick, this is one of the reasons why I chose this song. But check this out. So first we have a pretty regular kick. So when I first heard that, I thought, well, isn't that interesting? So you have like this really kind of like woodblock sounding top to it. I don't know if you can hear that, like it's very much at the top. And it doesn't have much bass at all. It kind of sounded like I want more weight in it. We were talking about dance hall track, that's the first thing that comes to mind, etc. So I start playing around with it and the following happened. So check this out. So again, this trim happens to be there, but it's at 0, it doesn't do anything. This is my cue. Let me bypass that for a moment. So that's what we have. Give it more bass. See, like I just described, like this is I think this is a good way to approach things. You listen to a sound and you try to decide, okay, before I'm even touching anything, what is it that I'm looking for? Well, I told you I wanted a little bit more bass, and that weird sound at the top. It did something for me where I was like, well, that's kind of an odd thing. Let me see what I can do. And then that's where you see this EQ curve. So we have more at 60 and more at, what's that, 166. The reason for these two frequencies were, I can show you that actually. Let me Let me show you the process here. Everything is a little bit of a process. The real-time analyzer, I use the Waves one, not because it's particularly awesome. It's actually super old and like, yeah, it's all right. But you get used to the way something looks and what it tells you. And in this case, let me show you. I played the kick, and I'm noticing these two ranges. This here, the 160 that I was just talking about, and this 60 hertz-ish place for the bottom, where I felt like the bottom is not quite there. The weight is not there that I would like to have. And you also notice this other thing. This happens a lot with program kick drums, which is you see a peak first, a little higher here, and then you see the bottom come in later, almost like a tukum, tukum. I don't know, it's not so much something that you hear, though you can get used to it, but you definitely see it right away. It's like there's a timing difference between the, let's say, the lower mid-range and the upper bass, or let's call it the upper bass and the lower bass, if you want to say, because we're talking about these 160 hertz and 60. But I would actually, I like the idea, let's say, okay, we have this kick drum, I want more weight. Hey, Richard, what's more weight? Well, more weight is somewhere between 40, 50, 60, 70 hertz to me. But why not try to find the exact frequency that is already in the sample, which seems to be about 60 hertz, right? So then the EQ I'm using to get that weight actually can be tuned to exactly that frequency. That makes a lot of sense to me, almost like do no harm, affect the sound only where you actually want to affect it and not just randomly anywhere. Like, for instance, I could use a shelf here, but shelves are a little unruly for me. They always are harder to control. They might have a Q setting, but they're not going to go as tight as a parametric EQ. But overall, I could push this up at 60. Here, I can turn this off for a second for you. Let's do a shelf on a band I didn't use, right? And see, like, even if I put it at 60 hertz, like I just said, there, it affects it all the way up to, well, whatever that is, 250, 300 hertz maybe. But that's not what I'm looking for, like I just said, or at least not yet. It could change. So that's why I don't use shelves often. Sometimes, more on the high end, not so much on the bottom where I want a little bit more of a detailed kind of sound. So let me turn that back off. I just wanted to show you what that would have looked like. But I chose the 60 hertz. Let me add that for a moment. Actually, let me turn off this top here. We'll go through all the motions here for you. We leave no stone left unturned, as long as you're listening to us. So one more time. Let me turn this off. Okay, let me find the weight. Did you hear that? Now we have the weight at the bottom. Turn it off. Okay, one more time. Oh, it stopped. There it is. See, that's successful. I like that. But then also listening to smaller speakers, I realized, well, you know, we need some more of the meat. The 60 hertz cannot be shown on small speakers, or might get lost, or might distort first. I don't like that. So I find it a good idea to also find a frequency around, let's say, well, you see, I like 98 hertz. 98 is probably the same as 100, but this is where I start. And in that range, like 100 to 200, probably not all the way to 200, like because 180 starts to get a little woofy. But like somewhere there might be a secondary bump in, for instance, in our kick that actually will read really, really well on a small speaker. And let me show you that one. We already saw it in the RTA. It was the 160 something. And actually, I'm not even sure. I might have typed it in, or sometimes I do this, or very often I do this, where I just, you know, scan it until I find it. I'm not going to do that right now, but you get the idea there. Let me just play you this frequency. Turn it back off. You see how that's thin in this? It's thick, but also thick on a small speaker. If you have one right now, just listen to that. And so these two frequencies give me weight and meat. if you wanted to say like that. Without all of them, skinny, with it, thicker, right? Makes sense to us. All makes sense, but we still have a lot of the top going on, that weird sound. You know, when you have a rock kick drum, for instance, there's a lot of top in there, like 3K, 4K, and the beater sound, etc. That might be part of the sound, but in this case, because the sound is such a unique sound in a way, it irked me a little bit. So I started working against it by first actually getting turning down the high end. And I want to say something about that in a moment, but check this out. Without the high end. And then with that. If you want to rewind that a little bit, that's cool. What you're hearing is not only that one obviously has more high end and is a little bit skinnier, and the other one is a little thicker. To me, it feels like if you actually lower the high end because you change the balance between high end sound and low end sound, there's actually an apparent more bass. This is the idea of subtractive EQ. You lower the high end to make that balance shift more into a bass thing. So without adding bass, it actually sounds like it has a little bit more bass, and I like that a lot. So let's do that. And then I felt like, you know, we should probably tie together the kick and snare a little bit. I just did the tape emulation on the snare, so let me do that on the kick as well, just a little bit. You know, it's a slightly different model. There are 5 models in this tape emulation, which is super awesome. But I just pushed it a little bit. Let's see I hope we can hear the difference. Let's see, because sometimes you do things and you think they do things and they really don't do things. But as long as it's not bad, I guess it doesn't matter. So let's try it. It's there. It's a little thickening device, and I like that, you know. That's the other thing, you know, instead of plugging random plugins on stuff, hey, let me try this, let me try that, I use plugins very, very deliberately. Like, I know I can get most of the sound I'm looking for out of the channel strip. I know that, you know, I'm looking for this like gluey kind of mid-rangey harmonics thing. I know that's not a compressor yet. You know, it could be, but I will start with a tape emulation first.
Justin Cortelyou is next. His credits include Kesha, Taylor Swift, U2, Lady Gaga, and Paul McCartney. And Justin takes us through his hybrid mixing process. Although we don't see the gear in action, he explains the moves he is using, so use your ears for this one.
I already have some EQ and some compression set up from the previous mix, and it actually sounds really good. We turn it up and see. So that is still going through the vac rack and the fatso. I'll talk about that in a little bit, but this is without any of that EQ. So you can hear, because Fred plays so softly, you get a whole lot of super low end, like a ton of really low end information. And it's great, but it's going to eat up a whole lot of space in your mix. So I'll engage this EQ. You can see I've got my filter. This is pretty, I'm not sure exactly what the slope is on this, but it's pretty musical, and you can get away with a lot before you really hear it kick in. So I'll actually start off with it off and then sweep it up until I lose that low end. And for this, I'm going to put it on the mains. Let me go to a spot where he's playing more. So there. I'll go a little bit higher. Right there. I'm also doing a shelf at, what is it, about 60 or so, just by a couple of dB. This is without it. Just to kind of bring it down a bit. And another trick that I like to do, it's not really a trick, it's kind of like cheating. I'll put it on a skinny EQ, similar to the MDW EQ. I'll go searching for bad frequencies. So here, I'll widen the Q now. Now that I found that, I'll just bring out just a couple dB. I'm adding a bit of top, maybe a little bit more air in the upper frequencies. I'm not doing much compression. I've got a fast attack, slower release, about a 4:1 ratio. I'm just doing about 3 dB of compression. I am expanding a little bit. And I just really honestly started experimenting with it. And I feel like it just, by doing it just a little bit, it adds a little bit more punch, and it kind of cleans up the drums a little bit, especially those snare rolls on the snare, kind of helps them to speak a little bit. So that's something that I've been doing, and I like it. So I'm going to keep on doing it. Okay. And here I've got my artist mix, kind of an older controller, but it works great. So here I'll solo this with kick out. So this is without any EQ or compression. Kind of a similar thing. I mean, that's fine. But for the kick in, I'm looking for attack, and I'm looking for low end. And then for the kick out, I use that for kind of the puff and the roundness, pillowy sound. So I'm not, me personally, I'm not looking for top end, I'm not looking for snap or anything. I'm just looking for that, you know, that pillow. So I'm switching between fast attack and slow attack. I'm not sure which one I like yet. We put both of the kicks together. Similar thing here, cutting out some low end. Actually, it's a similar curve here. When I was tracking, I did filter out some of the top and roll off some of the top of this. So I did a little bit of the EQ that I like the cleanup that I wanted to do on the Neve. I used a 10, I believe on that I used a 1081. So let's put both of them together. Oops. So I'll start there. That's a pretty good spot.
I hope you enjoyed 7 different ways of mixing a kick drum. Please leave any comments and questions below. Thank you ever so much for watching. Have a marvelous time. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Speak to you all very, very soon. So long, farewell, auf Wiedersehen, au revoir, adios, adio, tschüss, goodbye.